Okay, so today we will start with the closures in JavaScript. Okay, so I'll be back in a minute. Okay, I'm back here. So we'll start the closures in JavaScript. Closures is very important topic, and it is asked in all the interviews which are related to JavaScript. So asked in every interview related to JavaScript. And they will not ask what is closures. They will give you some problems which can only be solved by closures. So they will not say what is closures. Okay, the one interview, if they ask what is closure, that means that person don't know what is closures. Because if you directly ask closures, everybody is prepared the definition which they see in the internet. So everybody will answer that closure answer. But if you are able to solve the problems related to closure, that's the challenge. And most of the companies will give you the problem and you have to solve that problem using the closures. Closures is difficult to understand in the beginning, but we will do a lot of problems. So it will be easy for you in the future. Okay, so this is something introduction of the closures. Now, what is the closure? I will explain, then you will understand what is the closure means. Okay, so before understanding the closure, let's revise our little bit JavaScript knowledge which will be related in the closures. So one of the knowledge which we need for the closure is the scope chain. So let me walk through the scope chain again so that you will understand the scope chain, or those who have missed the scope chain, they will understand it in a better way. Now, let's say if I create a variable a equal to 1. To create a variable, I always use the var keyword, and I give the name of the variable and I give the value of the variable. Then I create another function f, and in this function I will say var b equal to 1. Now, since this b is created inside the function, so the scope of b is only limited to this function. But this a is created outside the function, so that means a is globally available. So I can access this a inside this function. Okay, I can access this function, this a value inside the function. So let's make b equal to 2 for now, so that we have difference. If I do console.log, a is a. So since a is created globally, so I can access this a inside the function f. Okay, but this b is created inside the function, so I cannot access this b outside the function. So because this is a global, it is available inside the function, but this is local to this function, and that is the reason b will not be available outside the function. So this is called a scope chain, that I can access the a variable in in this function because A is a global. The scope of A is global. Anything which is global can be accessed inside the function. So I create this function, then I will invoke this function. To invoke the function, I will say f parenthesis parenthesis. Once I invoke the function, you will see I can see this console.log A is 1. Because A is defined here, I can access it inside the function. But what happens if I say B? Whether will I be able to access the B outside the function? This is inside the function, and B I am writing outside the function. If I say B, it will give me this error because B is not available globally. B is available only inside this function. A is in the global space, B is in the local space of this function. So B will not be available outside the function, but B is available inside this function. If I do console.log of B, I will be able to access the B. But if I do B outside the function, I won't be able to do call B outside the function. Now this is the simple meaning of the scope chain, that from the parent I can access the child, but from the child I cannot access the child in the parent. So this is a global space and this function is a local space. I cannot access B outside the function. Let me give you one more example so that it is very clear what is the scope chain. If I say var equal to 1, or let's say x equal to 1, then I create a function f. Now I will say var b equal to 2 or y equal to 2. Sorry, the variable name I'll put xyz. I create another function inside the function, maybe function n, and then I will create another variable var z equal to 3. In India people say z, in USA they say z. Okay, so whatever you prefer you can say. Now tell me whether I can access x inside this function f. Yes or no? Just put it in the chat. Yes, I can access x inside the function f because x is the globally available. So x can be accessed inside the function f. Whether I can access y inside the f? Yes or no? Whether I can access y inside f? Yes, because y is defined inside this function, so y can be accessed here. Whether I can access x inside this n function? Yes, because this is globally available and it can be accessed inside this child, this function, and it can access inside this grandchild also because global is a parent, this is child, this is still the child of this function. Now tell me whether I can access y inside this function n? Yes, because y is in the parent function and this is a child function, so y can be accessed inside the n function. Now tell me whether I can access this z inside this f function. Here or here. I can write console.log z. No, that is correct. No is correct because z is only limited to this scope. So z cannot be accessed outside this scope. So I cannot access z here. Whether I can access z outside this function here? No, I cannot access z outside here because z is here. So scope is only limited to this. I cannot access z outside this function. Whether I can access y here? Whether I can access y? No, because y is created inside this function, so y cannot be accessed outside this function. The scope of y is f function and n function. The scope of z is only n function. Scope of X is everywhere. I can access here, I can access here, everywhere. So this is called the scope chain, that in the parent, child can access parent, but parent cannot access the child variables. This is the short about the scope chain which we need for the closures. Okay, we did this long back. I am just revising whatever the things are related to the closures. Now, one of the important things they ask in the interview, what is the lexical scope? This is also useful in the closures, but they can ask specifically what is the lexical scope. Now let me explain the lexical scope. So if I create a function f1 and I create a variable a inside this one, which has the scope of this function, okay, and then I call the f2 function, which I will write down now. So I'm calling, I have f1 function, I have variable a equal to 1, and I call f2 function, and I will create f2 function here like this. Okay, let me call the f2 function here, and here I will say console.log a is a. Okay. Now what I will do, I will call f1 function. So as soon as I call f1 function, it will go here, it will run line 1, and then it is calling f2 function, and f2 function has console.log a is a. Okay, I define a here and I call f2. Then I create f2 function, I say console.log of a. What do you think? What will be the value of a here when I run f1? So f1 will run this line, then this line, and then this function will be called, and we will run this line console.log. What will be the value of a here? Okay, one is Ole is saying 1, Ali is saying 1. I need answers. Just give the answer. Only 2 people have answered. Anand is saying undefined. Nikhil is saying error. Just kidding. I don't know. Okay, any other answer? Gothami is saying 1. Okay. So this let's understand this again. So this function var a equal to 1, and I am calling this f2. So many people will think that f2 is the child of f1. Is it correct? Because we're writing f2 here, so f2 can access this variable a because f2 looks like it is a child of f1, right? That's why many people are saying 1. Yes, Anand, we are calling only. Wait, I am coming to that point. Right, F1. Anand, I am coming to that point. Wait. Okay. So now let me run it, and then I will go through line by line again. Let's see who is correct. 1 is correct or something else is correct. Okay, A is coming 1. Is it right or wrong? Okay, so the problem is A is equal to 1 is coming is wrong because this one is taken from my previous example. Okay, let's do it again in the new tab because actually it is A is coming from my previous example. Sorry, let's take the new tab and I'm running it again. Now see, now you will see the real result. Okay, I am getting A is not defined. Okay, because in this function A is not defined. We have not created var A equal to something, and that is the reason we are getting A is not defined. A is created here, and then we call the f2 function. So many people will think F2 is the child of F1 because it is called inside the F1, and that is why they were saying console.log A will give answer 1. But this is a invoking. Invoking does not make F2 as a child. Invoking, you can invoke from anywhere. That does not mean that it is child. Child means it should be created here. If I am creating a function and I am creating another function inside it, then F2 will become child because I am creating here. But whereas the example which you see, this F2 is created globally. This F1 is also created globally. These both are the global in the global space. So when var A is created, it is created only the scope of this F1. And since it is created in the F1, it cannot be accessed in the F2 because F2 is in the global space. And F2 can access all the variables which are in the global space, not in the F1. This A is a private variable to F1. And it cannot be accessed to F2, which is the globally available. Though I am calling it here, does not mean it is created here. So there are two things you have to differentiate. One is the created and one is invoked. Invoked means we call it, we run it. This is the invoke. Invoking does not make something child. But created makes function as a child. So even though I am calling F2 here, it looks like F2 is the child of F1, but F2 is not a child of F1. So F2 cannot access the variable created in the F1. Only the functions which are created inside the F1 can access the variable A equal to 1. And that is the reason I am getting error for this one. Is it clear? Okay, I am not yet done. I'm not yet done. I want to make it more clear, this one. So what is the lexical scope? Let me tell you what is the lexical scope. Sorry. Sorry. So the lexical scope means the scope which is the scope when we create the function. Okay. So this function is created in the globally. The scope of this function is global. This function is created globally. So the scope of this function is global. Though inside, I'm not talking about the inside scope. Inside scope is this function scope. But this F2 exists in the global space. This F1 exists in the global space. Let me write down a couple of more functions. So let's say if I create function F3, and here if I write down the console.log, A is again A. So I created this function F3 and the scope of this function is F1 because it is created inside the F1. So where it is created? It is created inside the F1. So the lexical scope of F3 is inside F1. Okay, so when I say what is the scope of F1, since it is created at the top level, F1 is situated globally. Is F3 situated globally? No, because it is created inside this function. So the scope of F3 is inside F1. So the lexical scope of F3 is inside F1. So I can access everything inside F3 which is created inside F1 or globally, or it is created inside F3. But I cannot create a variable inside F2 because a is created inside the F1, and the lexical scope of F2 is global. Lexical scope of a is inside the F1. So I cannot access something which is created in F1 to another function which is globally available. Okay, this becomes little complicated. Let me refresh this again. I will explain it again. Let me create a new tab, otherwise it will mismatch the two things. Let me explain lexical scope again, because lexical scope is important. I will write on lexical scope is a scope of function or variable where it is created, not executed. So tell me one thing now. I will ask you questions to make the lexical scope clear. Function F1. Where this function is created? In which scope? Global scope or where? It is the global scope. If I create this function and if I check the global variables, I will be able to see F1 there. So the lexical scope of F1 is what? Global space. So the lexical scope of F1 is global space. So any variable in global space can be accessed in F1. Actually global variable in global space is accessed anywhere. So because since it is created globally, so whatever variable I create globally, like I create another variable var x equal to 1, I can access this variable inside this function. Okay, since because x is in the global space and this F1 is also in the global space, so I can access x here in this function F1. Now if I create variable y equal to 1 inside this function, okay, can I access this y outside this function? I cannot access. No, I cannot access. Why? Because y is created inside the F1. So the lexical scope of this y is F1, not the global space. So I cannot access this y. This is in the child one. I cannot access in the parent. Parent is the global. This is the parent. I cannot access something created in the child in the global space. If I create a function here F2, can I access y here in the F2? Yes, I can access y in the F2 because y is created F in the F1 and F2 is the child of F1 because it is inside the F1. So anything created in the F1 is available inside the F2. Let's say if I create a function, another function F3 here. This F3 is created in the globally, so it has the scope of global. I can access x inside the F3, but I cannot access y inside the F3 because y is inside this F1 and we cannot access y outside the F1. So even if I call F3 here, I'm invoking F3. That does not make F3 as a child of F1. It is only the invoking. This is only invoking and not creating. Here I'm creating the function. That's why I'm able to access the y. But here F3 is outside the F1. So anything created in the F1 will not be available in the F3 because even though I invoke it here, it does not make F3 as a child of F1. It is only the invoking. F3 has a global space, so anything available globally can be accessed inside F3, but not, since it is invoked here, does not mean I can access this variable. So why I cannot access inside the F3? Is it clear? So every code which is written in JavaScript has a lexical scope where it is created. Since it is created inside the F1, so this is lexical scope of F1. So anything created inside the F1 can be accessed in the F2. But since this is created outside this function, anything created inside the F1 cannot be accessed in the F3 because F3 is outside the F1. And we are talking about creation, not the invoking. Invoking does not make this function as a child of F1. So only the child of F1 can access the variables created in F1. So I cannot access Y because Y has a scope of F1 and F3 is global. This F3 is global. I cannot access something created inside the function. I cannot access outside this function. So in the F3, I cannot access Y1, Y, but in the F2, I can access Y because F2 is created inside the F1. So the lexical scope of F2 is F1, and anything created inside the F1 can be accessed by the F2. It is clear? Only 3 people have said it clear. So that means okay, let's do this example again, and I will do something because this lexical scope is very important. That is the functions where it is created, that is important. Let me do this function again. Okay, let me do this example again, but then I will add one more thing. I create function F1, and here I say var a equal to 1, and then I call F2. Now F2 is invoked, not created. So F2 is not a child of F1. And here I will write function F1, F2. And here I will say console.log of A is A. Okay, so I created these two functions. Now if I run F1, so I'm getting error because var is created and then F2 is called, and F2 is trying to access A, but since A has only the scope, limited scope of this one, so I'm getting error of A is not defined. Okay, so now if I just do var A equal to 55 or 5. So I created this var A equal to 5. Now my question is, what will happen when I call F1 again? Whether it will give error again or it will give the value of 5. Because initially I created this function, I invoked the F1. Now after this I am creating var equal to 5. Okay. So many people are saying 5, 5, 5. So many people think that since at the creation time of F2, A was not there, so even if I define A, it will give error here. Okay, it's like Ali is saying error. Okay, so many people think like that. Okay, let's see what will happen F1 again. If I get error again, because creation time I give this A equal to A and I call F1 and it is giving error because A is not there in the scope of F2, nor even the globally. But now I created A in the global space. Now if I press F1, it is saying A is 5. Okay, now why it's saying A is 5? The reason is when I run this F1 program, when I run this F1, it runs this line, then it will run the F2, and F2 is in the global space. So in the global space, it's saying console.log A is A. So when it runs the F2, it will go into the memory and it will check what are there in the scope of F2. A is not defined in the F2. So it will go into global space. What is the A in the, if A exists in the global space or not? Since I created A equal to 5, now A is in the global space. So F2 can access anything which is in the global space, but not in the F1 space. Since I created globally, even though it is created before, but when I run it, it will check all the global space. If global space has variable A, and then it will go, oh wow, I found it. It's not related to hoisting. I'm not talking about hoisting. When I run this F2, it will say A, and then it will check in the memory of the F2 whether A is available. Since A is not available in the F2, then it will go to the global space, and in the global space it will try to find A variable, and it will find the A variable here because I defined A in the global space. So I'm getting A is 5. The reason is when we invoke the F2, it will check all the scope. It will check its own scope. It will check the parent scope, it will check the global scope, it will check all the scope. Since F2 has parent the global, so whenever I invoke it, even though creation time A is not there, but when I invoke it, whether that variable exists in the memory or not, if it exists in the memory, it will run that, it will show that value, whatever it is in the memory. Okay, I think this example I'll do again. So I have function F1. So I say var A equal to 1, and then I'm doing console.log B is B. Okay. So what will happen if I run F1? If I run F1, I'm getting error because B is not defined. What it will do, it will try to find B in the scope of this. It is not finding it. Then it will try to find B in the global space. It is not finding it. So it is giving error. Now if I define B in the global space, then again if I run F1, then what will happen? I'm getting B is 4. So what it is doing now again? It is again checking if B is in this scope, no. Then it will check if B is in the global space, yes. So now it is not giving error. So even though this function is created once, when we invoke it at that time, it will check all the memory locations if B exists. And if B exists in any of the memory location, then it will display it. Otherwise, it will give error. So if I have not written this line, it would have given the error. Okay, so I'm trying to, I'm not talking about garbage collection now. Okay, I'm just saying that whenever we run the function, it tries to see the memory location if B is available in that scope or not. So we have to think, where is the B available? Is B available in this scope? No. Whether the B is available in the globally? Initially it was not, but when I write this line, B is available in the global space. So I'm able to see it. Okay, it is little difficult, but I will repeat it multiple times, then it will become clear. So you will be clear if I talk it multiple times. Okay, let me repeat it again and again, then it will be clear for you. Let me write down the function x, and I will create function y. Let's create third function z. Okay, var a equal to 1. Here I will say var b equal to 2. Now var c equal to 3. Can I access a inside y? No. Even if I write y here, I invoke y here, I cannot access A inside the Y, because this is in the parent scope, global scope. This is also in the global scope, and A is inside this scope. So even though I invoke Y, I cannot access A. So if I write down like this, console.log of A, this will give me error, because even though I'm invoking Y in the X, but Y is not the child of X, so I cannot access the variable A inside the Y. Can I access A here? Can I access A here? No. Can I access B here? No. Even if I call Z, that does not make Z as a child of Y, so I cannot access any variable created in the Y in the Z. Okay, so even if we call Y here, Y is not a child of X, so Y cannot access A. So this student generally make this problem. They think that since Y is invoked here, so Y is the child of X, so Y can access it, but Y cannot access this variable, because lexically Y is created globally and this variable is local. Local variable cannot go to the global space, but variable in the global space can come to the local. So if I something in the global space like var k equal to 4, I can access k anywhere in this function also, in this function also, in this function also, because variables created in the globally can be accessed anywhere. But variable created inside the function can be accessed only inside this function or the child of it. Though Y is invoked here, but Y is not the child. It can only get the child when I create a function here. Let's say if I create function L. This is the child of X. So this function can access the variable A, but not this and not this. Hope this is clear, that if it is, we have to think about the lexical scope, that is when the function, where the function is created. If it is created inside another function, it has the scope of this function. If it is created outside the function, then this has the global space. So we have to think where the function is created, and based on that location, we have to think whether this function can access any variable or not. So that is, in simple words, I try to explain the lexical scope. Okay. Closures is a big chapter. I am just going small things in the closure so that you can understand the closure clearly. Okay, let me now share the whiteboard. I am stop sharing the screen. I will now share the whiteboard. Can you see the whiteboard? Okay. Okay, let me now draw something to explain the closures. Okay. What is this? What I am trying? Okay, oval, global space. Yeah, the main thing is, my purpose is, this is the global space. Let's name it with the G. Okay, let's name it with the G. And it has some variable like A1. Okay, this is the universe. Think this is the universe. I have a variable A1, and this is A2. This is A3, and this is A4. So these are the variables inside this global space. Okay, and it has let's say a function f. Okay, so there are a lot of things we get in the global space. Think this G as a universe, and it contains everything. All the functions, all the variables are inside the global space. Okay, let me clear it and let's draw another thing. Let me draw this global space again, and I will draw one function f, and I have variable a. Okay, so this global space has a function f and the variable a. So this variable is in the global space, so this function can access this variable. So if I write the console.log of a, I can see that a, because a is in the global space, and I can see anything inside this function which is available in the global space. So I can see a inside the function. So this is a short thing again about a function and the variable. Let me clear and let me draw a little more complicated stuff. This is the global space. Okay. Now we have the variable a, which can be accessed anywhere. This is the function f. Okay, I can access a inside this f. I have another variable inside f, that is called the b. I have another variable inside this function, and I have another function n inside the f, and this has the variable of the c. Now tell me one thing, can anything access variable a? Can any function f and can access a? Yes, because a is globally available. It can be accessed globally. It can be accessed inside f. It can be accessed inside n. So here also it can access a. Here also it can access a. Here also it can access a. If I do console.log here of a, I can see it. If I do console.log of a, I can see it. If I do console.log of a, I can see it. Okay. Now let me erase this. Okay, so let me tell this again. This is a variable, this is b variable, and this is c variable. Can global space access the variable b? Can b global variable access the b? If I do console.log of b, will it work? It will not work, because b is inside the function f, and globally I cannot access b. Can I access c globally? I cannot access c globally, because c is inside this function, inside this end function. I cannot access c outside this function. Okay, let me rub it now again. Okay, now for some method, using some method or using some technique, if I bring this n function, outside the f to the global space, so the n will come here, and it has the variable of c. If by some reason, if I move this n function outside this f to the global space, then can this n function access b? If somehow I move this n function to the outside in the global space, okay, see, can n access the b? Can n access the b? Yes. So even if I move this n function from f function to outside, this n function has, due to the lexical part, this n function can access anything which is created in the f function. So though n function is moved outside the function f to the global space, it can access the variable b, because we have to think of the lexical scope. Lexically, n is created inside f. So anything created inside f can be accessed by the function n. And even if I move this n function to outside global space, because of the lexical scope, n can access variable b, though it is now in the global space. And that is called closures. Closure means a function returned to the global space can access the variable inside its parent function because of the lexical scope. In JavaScript, lexical scope is always important. So where it is created, that is important. Then if I move it outside this original place, then also it will be able to access the variable b, because lexically we are moving, lexically n is created inside f. Even if I move outside f, then also it can access variable b, and that is called the closures. Okay, let me draw it again. This is a global variable g. This is the function f. Let me create f. Let me create another function f2. Let me create variable a. Whether I can access a in f function? Yes, because a is globally, I can access f. Whether I can access a in f2 function? Yes, I can access a in f2 function. I created variable b inside f. I created variable c inside f2. Can f2 access b? No. Can f access c? No, because both have different scope and it cannot be accessed. Now I created another child function n, and I created another child function n1. And inside n I have variable d. Inside n1 I have variable e. Okay. Can n access b? Can n access b? Yes, because n can access everything which this f is created. Can n access c? No, because n is created inside this f and the c is inside this f2. So n cannot access c. But somehow I move this n outside. Now n is not inside, it is outside. It has the variable d. Since n is created lexically inside f function, so it can access all the variables inside the f. So even if n is outside in the global space, it can access the variable b. And if I do console.log of b here, I can see it is available. And if I move this n1 outside, then since n1 is created lexically inside f2, it can access the variable c. So if I do console.log of c, I can access it, I can see it. Even though now n1 is not inside the f2, but at the time of creation, it was there inside f2. Therefore, it can access all the variables which are available in the f2. So even though when I run the f2 function and f2 function is gone from the memory, it is run, all the code is run, then also the variable c can be accessed inside the n1. which is available, which is existing on the global space. Because we moved this n outside, so it is now in the global space. Though F2, when we run F2, all the code will go away. It is not there. It is gone out of the, when we run the code, it goes away. Whatever we run, one by one, line by line, it goes away. But then also it can access the variable C here in this space because of the lexical scope. And this process of moving the function from one function to the global space is called the closures. This is, I am explaining the theory. We will see practical how it works, how we move function from here to outside global space, and how we access the B when it is in the global space. That is the purpose of the closure. So when the interview person will ask you the closure, they will give you some problem where you have to access the variable B inside a function. And that is why you have to use your closure knowledge, how you have to move this function outside in the global space and how to use this B inside the global space. That is what interview will ask, how you will do practically. If they ask closure, everyone will say, okay, the function is moved to the global space from another function, and then it can access all the variables inside its parent function. That is the simple term definition of the closure. But no one is going to ask you this definition. They will ask you the practical example of how you will implement this closure, which we will see in few days, coming days, tomorrow, day after tomorrow, because it's a big thing and I have to show you a lot of examples to make this thing clear. See, I have explained you closure today. I know this is a new topic. Many people will not understand clearly the closure, and when I will repeat tomorrow, day after tomorrow, then things will become more clear, and when I will show you some examples, then it will become still more clear. So even if you have not understood closure today, it does not matter, because this is the first day of you for closure. Once we do more examples and once I explain this figure again tomorrow, it will become more clear. Okay, so even if you are not clear 100% today, but in this week you will be able to understand closures perfectly well, and you will be able to solve the problems related to closures. Okay, let me clear this. Okay, let me share the screen now. Okay, so I'm stopping the recording. If you have any questions, though I know the closures is not 100% clear to you, but I will make it clear, more clear tomorrow and day after tomorrow and this week. So by end of this week, you will be very clear on the topic of the closures.